So as a conclusion to this series on virtues that I've been preaching on during the season of Easter, I want to summarize them with the gifts of the Holy Spirit. Because, as we'll see in a moment, the gifts of the Holy Spirit perfect the virtues in us. So what are the gifts of the Holy Spirit? Where do we get this from? Why do we keep referring to them here at this Mass for Pentecost? Well, we get them from the holy prophet Isaiah. In chapter 11, he says, there shall come forth a shoot from the stump of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of his roots. And the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and of fear of the Lord. And his delight shall be the fear of the Lord. So again, these gifts that we receive from the Holy Spirit are perfected by the virtues are perfected by these gifts of the Holy Spirit. Tanqueray lays it out thusly. He says, by the gift of understanding, we can penetrate farther in the truths of faith to discover the hidden treasures and discern the mysterious harmony therein contained. So we have a connection there between the gift of understanding and the virtue of faith. The gift of knowledge makes us look upon creatures from the point of view of their relation to their Maker, which is a form of temperance. So knowledge and temperance. The gift of fear of the Lord, by weaning us from the false goods of earth that might allure us into sin, which is also talking about temperance, fortifies the virtue of hope and intensifies the desire for the happiness of heaven. So fear of the Lord is tied to hope. Wisdom makes us relish divine things, thus increasing our love of God. So wisdom and charity go together. The gift of counsel crowns the virtue of prudence by showing us in exceptional or difficult cases what it behooves us to do or not to do. So counsel is a perfection of prudence. Piety perfects the virtue of religion, and that's a part of justice, making us recognize in God a Father whom we delight in glorifying by love. So again, when we talked about justice, we spoke about justice as in relationship to God as being the virtue of religion. And so piety and justice go together. And finally, the gift of fortitude completes the virtue which bears the same name by urging us on to what is more heroic in endurance and in daring. So, we've already spoken throughout this series of the relationship between the virtues and healing. So, obviously, if the gifts of the Holy Spirit are perfecting the virtues, then we see also then the relationship of the gifts of the Holy Spirit in relation to spiritual healing. Remember what we say when we speak about the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit is the personal love of the most holy Trinity. And since we can only be healed by love, because it is a lack of love that wounds us, we should certainly then be turning to the Holy Spirit for our healing, as we even heard in the sequence before the gospel. And more importantly, not more importantly, but just as importantly, we need then to cooperate with the gifts and graces He gives us. Because as with all gifts, it's one thing to receive it, but it's another thing to actually open it. You can receive it, but you have to actually use it. And this is where we have to see in living the gifts that we are rejecting that ungodly self-reliance, which I've mentioned many times in relation to our wounds and healing, as being that principal obstacle to our healing. We need to let go of our ungodly self-reliance and instead rely on the Holy Spirit to enkindle in us the fire of the divine love. But we want to remember something very, very critical in all of this, as in with most virtues and most aspects of the Christian life. It's not just a one-time thing. This surrender to God is not a single instance. This nonsense of once saved, always saved, that you can just simply do something once and it doesn't matter what else you do. That's not how a relationship works. We need to be constantly asking for these graces in order to live them, because God is a patient and loving Father in all of this, and He wants to give us what we need, but we need to ask. And not because He's trying to feel better about Himself by getting us to ask, not because He enjoys putting conditions. It's because if you don't ask, that means you don't have the humility to recognize that you need it. And again, this is not just a one-time thing. It has to be a continual process of asking, because we are continually in need of God's grace and the gifts of the Holy Spirit. And therefore, we need to be continually asking, because the asking is an act of humility. And humility is the greatest way to connect ourselves with God. In other words, to remove that obstacle of pride, which is the principal obstacle to our relationship with God. If the Holy Spirit does not seem to be acting in our lives like we like, then we need to be asking ourselves what obstacles there are in us to that action. Because we all have the Holy Spirit. If you are baptized and you are not in a state of mortal sin, then you have the Holy Spirit. If you've been confirmed, you've received an even strengthening of those gifts. We have to learn how to receive and to live the gift. Now, while the coming of the Holy Spirit in our day is marked more by that still small voice that Elijah experienced on Mount Horeb, instead of those dramatic manifestations which God used to, shall we say, jumpstart the church, whose birthday we're celebrating today, as we hear in the reading from the Acts of the Apostles, we still have the Holy Spirit. And we should see His actions in our life more. And if we want to see His action in our life more, then we need to surrender ourselves completely. And by asking and seeking, we will then receive and find.